All right, good evening and welcome to the 2020 Human Rights Day celebration. My name is Aaron Pelker and I'm a community engagement coordinator at the Missouri Historical Society, and I want to thank you for spending part of your Thursday evening with us. Before we get to tonight's program and discussion, I do have a couple of brief remarks. First, I want to mention that both the Missouri History Museum and Soldiers Memorial Military Museum are open to the public every Wednesday through Sunday. Your safety is a top priority, and we would love for you to visit us. Advanced free reservations are required to visit all our locations, but please, um, visit mohistory.org to plan your visit and reserve your free tickets. I also want to thank all of our Missouri Historical Society members and all of you in St. Louis City and County for your tax contributions to the Zoo Museum Tax District. Next, before I turn it over to my collaborators on this evening's program to get the discussion started, I do want to explain a few of the features you'll find on Zoom that might be helpful. One feature I'd like to highlight is the Q&A box on your Zoom toolbar. Please use that Q&A function to submit any questions you might have for our panel. We'll regularly check the Q&A box to field those questions. And lastly, I'd like to mention that at the end of tonight's program, we hope that you'll complete a short survey that will open automatically in your internet browser. We appreciate and look forward to your feedback. With that, I would like to turn it over to my collaborator on this year's Human Rights Day, Jamala Rogers, to kind of explain what our program will look like tonight and a little bit about the history of what we've done in years past. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jamala to get us started. Thanks again.
Thank you, Aaron, and happy Human Rights Day to everybody. We are glad that you could join us, and we hope that you knew that today, December 10th, is the day that we celebrate the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so this will be our 24th year, and we go back all the way to 1996 when we were given a grant to do human rights education and then plan for the 50th anniversary of the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in St. Louis and all across the country. And after we did that and we did training and we realized that people were woefully unfamiliar with the human rights and the Universal Declaration. So we said we have to keep going, and we've been going and going, and so here we are today. What we use for our guiding for each year when we do the theme is we use this little book we call it the Little Blue Book, but it's an abbreviated version of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so when we're looking at a theme, we're looking at like what's going on in the world, in St. Louis, in the country, that we could lift up and talk about human rights. And one of the interesting things that I remember learning in those human rights education trainings was that sometimes human rights will conflict with one another. So for example, your freedom to practice your religion might come in square opposition to somebody else's human rights. And I've been thinking a lot about that as we deal with COVID, because there's some people who, they may not even know about this human right, but the human right to actually assemble peacefully. So you have people that are not wearing masks, that are assembling, and they are in conflict with other people's right to life, liberty, and personal security. So that's not necessarily all negative. What it is an opportunity to talk about what those human rights are for everybody and how we can both honor that. And so it's always a teachable moment, but alas, we have not had many of those teachable moments during COVID. But I just want to lift that up to say all the times when you talk about human rights for everybody, they are universal. They are non-transferable, but they are in fact often in conflict with other norms and traditions. And so it's a living, breathing document, and we honor that. And so tonight we are going to be talking about being counted. Fair representation is a human right. And I am going to turn it over to Carlos, but remind you that this is a planning committee that consists of partnership with the Missouri History Museum. Jonathan Pulfus represents the American Friends Service Committee. We have Carlos Suarez representing the United Nations Association, and myself representing the Youth Council for Positive Development. So we're going to get started, passing it on to Carlos, who will introduce our illustrious panelists. Carlos.
Thank you, Jamala, for that wonderful introduction, and welcome everybody again this evening. It's an honor to be here with you all and be a part of this esteemed committee for Human Rights Day. And as Jamala mentioned, I also serve as president of the United Nations Association of St. Louis. So it's really at the core of our work as an association and to celebrate Human Rights Day. So before I introduce our panelists, as Jamala mentioned, the Universal Declaration, today's theme is really focused on being counted and fair representation as a human right. And with everything that's happening in the world, obviously with COVID, at play, we also have our recent national election, and as well as the census. So taking a look at those issues at hand, we said, it's really important for everybody to be represented, in election, in the democratic process, and to have a stake in our country. And so we took a look at Articles 7 and 21 and even 28 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so just to review, Article 7 is referring to all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. Article 21, referring to, first, everyone has the right to take part in the government of his or her country directly or through freely chosen representatives. Secondly, everyone has the right of equal access to public service in his or her country. And thirdly, the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. This shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage, and shall be held by secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedures. And Article 28 is referring to everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized. So these are some of the talking points that we're referring to in terms of today's topic of being counted and fair representation as a human right. So now I want to introduce you to our esteemed panelists for this evening. Joining us here, we have three great panelists. Firstly, Sean Nicholson, who is a campaign manager that pushed to enact Clean Missouri in 2018 and led the effort to defeat Amendment 3 in 2020. He and his family are based out of Kansas City. We also have Janaea Johnson, an UMSL or University of Missouri St. Louis social work student. She is a voice on voting rights within the community. And as a young person, Janaea is helping to build a world that is just and fair for all citizens. And thirdly, Alexandra Johnson. She's an attorney at law. Alex has a long history of public service in her private life and professional career, including working with the St. Louis Tax Assistance Program, legal advocates for abused women, the St. Louis San Luis Potosi Friendship Committee, Hispanic Leaders Group, Comunidad STL, Midtown Community Services, and various inclusive organizations at her children's schools. So please join me in welcoming our panelists for the evening. So thank you all for joining. And I first wanted to ask, as we're gonna have a pretty casual conversation for the evening, but first of all, related to this topic of being counted and fair representation as it relates to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, what does that really mean to you in your line of work or in your involvement in the community. And yeah, so we'll get started. Sean, if you don't mind going first.
Yeah, so brass tacks, I've been working on redistricting policy, redistricting reform for the last 4 or 5 years. And we've had 2 statewide campaigns in Missouri now, one on a citizen-initiated plan, and then the legislature, the General Assembly, responded to that with their own plan. One of the things that the crafters of Amendment 3 that just passed, what they want to see happen is for not everyone to count in the population base for maps. So there's a thing that is wrong on its face. From a moral perspective, it also has pretty profound impacts on who matters and who is represented and where resources and power lie in our state government. Every state in America right now counts everyone in their state legislative and congressional maps. That has not always been the case, but the crafters and the backers of Amendment 3 want to make Missouri a test case, want to make it the first to move away from the standard that every state uses right now of counting everyone when it comes time to divide up the population for House and Senate districts.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And Janaea, tell me more about your work in the community in creating a more just life for everyone, and what kind of the declaration refers to you in your mind.
Well, within the community, I mainly work in the 22nd Ward with OBS staff, and within that line of work, how the declaration I feel like ties into that is just that we see a lot of individuals in the community itself not being counted. I feel like a lot of people have been left out in the sense of like being forgotten about. A lot of people we see literally on the streets, in poverty, just in positions that don't necessarily align with having those human rights respected. So when it comes to working in the 22nd Ward and being at OBS, I feel like representation and being counted means to not forget about literally anybody, regardless of what position they may be in. So.
That's perfect. Thank you for sharing that, Janaea. And also, Alex, your work is very extensive here in the community. So I'm really also interested in hearing, your perspective on this.
Thanks. Well, I mean, I was a member, just to give you guys a little bit of history, I was a member of Model United Nations in college. So it's been some time, and I hadn't really had occasion, honestly, to reread the Bill of Rights since then. And it's a beautiful document. Just looking it up again for this particular event, it's really great. And for me, a lot of what I do locally is based on my experience when I ran for office about 4 years ago in 2017. It'll be 4 years in a couple of months. And I realized that our community, the Latinx community here in St. Louis, wasn't really organized to be active politically. There are specific organizers, and there's certainly tremendous work being done in a lot of different areas. As you mentioned, a member of the Hispanic Leaders Group. I'm also the immediate past president of the Hispanic Bar Association. And so there was a lot of that done. But when we talk about everyone having the right to take part in the government, equal access to public service, and expressing our will in periodic and genuine elections, we go to the stuff that Sean was talking about, that structural stuff, but there's also a cultural element. And so when I ran for office, I realized that Latinos in Missouri are kind of invisible in a lot of ways. I would be talking to organizers, and I'm not saying that Sean would ever do this or that this was an issue with Sean, but people like Sean who were deeply in politics. And I would say, well, I'm a member of this group and I'm a member, and they'd be like, no, there's no Latinos doing this kind of stuff. And I'd be like, no, seriously, we meet like every Wednesday, the first one, like, no, we're here. So a big part of my you know, my work is you know, I support and work with Denise Lieberman and a ton of voting rights outreach efforts and things like that. But a lot of it is also just cultural. For example, as president of the Hispanic Bar Association, I was sending out emails that went out to the entire legislature of Missouri. And I knew, being in Missouri, that not many, you know, not all of the legislators would receive information about Latinos in Missouri positively. But my point was, we're here, you know, to really push kind of also the cultural element. And of course, in terms of representation, I can't overlook something that I think is relevant to all Black, Indigenous, and people of color by POC. All of us pay taxes. None of us get tax breaks. None of us say, oh, wait, you don't get the same access to people, you know, to services as other people, as white folks. So you don't have to pay as much tax. No, we pay the same taxes. And in fact, undocumented folks pay taxes. So we pay the taxes, but don't always get the same representation and have to fight off battles, like Sean is saying, Missouri wanting to be the test case, a really, I mean, gosh, Sean, what would the word, wouldn't you just say just flat out exclusion? I mean, just exclusion, right? It's just like, we're just not going to count you. You're not here. You're not on the books. You just don't count. I mean, that's got to be exclusion. It's the opposite of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's, you know, I mean, would you agree, Sean? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, I mean, yes, they want to exclude people for the purposes of consolidating power and literally having families and constituents and residents not count so that they don't have to be represented and to skew the overall balance of power in the state.
Right. So Janae, I you know, imagine you see that too. And not to take the moderating away from Carlos, sorry, but just as a follow-up.
Absolutely, yes. That is definitely something seen, just not only with any, you know, people of color. I could imagine people in other positions, people with disabilities, people in incarceration. There's the list kind of just goes on and on in the sense of you know, running for elections. Apparently, the only thing it's about is winning. When in reality, that's not the case. If you don't have the people, you know, who are you going to have this power over? You know, who's going to be run, or, you know, however they may think. But absolutely, I see that as well.
Oh, great. Yeah, and this is supposed to be, you know, a fluid conversation. So be sure, feel free to continue and segue as freely as possible. You know, talking about some of the systematic, you know, effects that are in place. You know, Sean, especially from your work in deeply in politics, like, you know, what are some of the, I guess, biggest barriers that you're seeing in terms of representation, and what are some things that we can do to help, you know, I guess, build a more equal and inclusive, you know, society for being represented?
Yeah, so I think there will be specific and tangible things in the year ahead. I think we can answer that in like a great big picture sense. I think part of the answer needs to be rooted in the fact that there are folks in power now who have a vested interest in not including anyone who's not in the process now. And so they are perhaps, you know, creating structural barriers or soft barriers to inviting people into the process, because that disrupts things. And so that looks like anything from inaccessible hearings and meetings and things like that, and at times a day or parts of town that, you know, folks just can't get to. But I think one of the things that will be a big fight both for the health of Missouri's democracy and the American experiment in the next year is stopping an exclusionary population base from coming to pass, from having House and Senate districts in Missouri drawn on anything other than the total population. And one of the ways that we've been able to help tell the story of why that's such a big deal, and what was interesting in the Amendment 3 campaign is the backers of the amendment backed away from being honest about what they're trying to do, just because it is so profound and radical what they're trying to bring to bear. Some of that is just like general dishonesty, and some of that's just like they know that they have opened a can of worms that's rough. So there will be opportunities for all of the public to be a part of the redistricting process in 2021. Some of that will be through official channels, and some of that will be through channels that need to be created by the community, by organizations around the state, for residents to talk about what community means to them, where the political or where the community boundaries are to people who actually live and breathe in these neighborhoods and towns. It's not necessarily the same of what politicians want. And then there will be a lot of work that needs to happen both through official channels and then through advocacy and campaigning and everything else to make sure that decision makers and powerful folks who aren't officially in office perhaps, but still very powerful, understand just how problematic it would be to not count everyone in our maps. So just to put a finer point on that, folks who are at a webinar about universal human rights, like we might say, everyone should be counted because that's the right thing to do. But this matters in like very tangible senses for who has power, who would lose power, and for the resources that would come to our communities. What's on the table, or what the other side is trying to do, what the proponents of Amendment 3 want to do, is draw maps based on the citizen voting age population of the state, which would mean that 1.5 million Missouri residents, children, non-citizen immigrants, like just don't count in the math. And so you would draw legislative districts based on 4.5 million Missourians instead of 6.1 million Missourians. And that would disproportionately impact communities where there are a lot of kids, and it would disproportionately impact communities of color just because communities of color happen to be relatively younger, and as a whole, as an aggregate. If this comes to pass, 1 in 5 white Missourians would lose political representation in the state capitol, while it would be 1 in 4 Black Missourians, and then half of the Latino and Asian American population in the state. So it is not an abstract thing. It is a very real, would have really profound discriminatory impact, and that is not accidental. That is a known fact, and the proponents of this thing push it forward anyway.
Well, thank you for that. And yeah, as you mentioned, there's definitely huge consequences for that to be happening, and a big kind of takeaway from what you mentioned is a transfer in power and resources that is going to disproportionately affect our own citizens. So working towards a more inclusive environment is definitely something that has to be reckoned with from what I'm hearing. We do also have some questions that have been coming through that we do want to address. So I'll leave this up to the panel. But how do you encourage people who have been historically encouraged to remain invisible to come forth and be counted, vote, and participate in advocacy? If anybody wants to take that.
Okay. Well, at OBS, we've definitely found it, I would say, kind of not truly like difficult, but hard, or maybe difficult, I suppose, is the word in that sense, to encourage people that we work with in the 22nd Ward to try to think about voting, or just things that might align with having their rights heard, or their voices heard. So I suppose what we really try to do is in the sense of getting their interests. We try to gain to see what people issues they may have going on, and try to connect that in the sense to let them know that, hey, even, again, I'm sure that they have been in a position where they possibly have tried to make their issues heard or make their voices heard and have been ignored. So us at OBS, we try to reinstate that. I'm not sure about necessarily everybody in the outside world, but we here care, and we see that if we all get into bigger numbers and we all band together, that changes can be made, especially if you press on the officials that are running. It's not necessarily about always trying to say what's in it for you, because sometimes people in higher power, they don't always look at the issues of the people being issues of their own. So we might try to let those people know that if we band together and we come in higher numbers, that they can't necessarily ignore the majority. And if they, if they want to win, that they need to realize some changes will be made. And so we try to let them know that we are in this together, and that if you do keep pressing, keep pushing forward in the way that we are, things will happen. It may take time, it may take a little persuasion, but that we are here even if they do not hear you, and we will make sure that things get done for you. So that's what at least what I usually try to do, in the sense of trying to get people to realize that it's about you. It's about you, your needs, and again, everybody doesn't necessarily think like that in that case. And so whichever way we would have to spin it to people who are in the power to make those changes, we will do so. But that in the end, it's about what you need for yourself, what the community needs, and what you all want to see get done. So please take the chance. Please take the chance, make the move, and do what you have to do so that you can see a better future for yourself and your community.
Great, thank you, Janaea. And Alex, I'd love to hear from you on your perspective on this issue as well.
Well, I kind of have a follow-up, if I can, to Janaea. Janaea, like what, turnout is a huge issue in the Latinx community. And, these issues, I mean, you can hear Sean throwing these numbers out, 1 out of 4 African-Americans, that the Black community, half the Latinx community. And of course, demographically, we know that the fastest growing group, so the youngest and fastest, most alive group at this point are Latin in Missouri, are Latinx and Black communities, right? So we it's not accidental that they're consolidating all the power into the older white community, like that. That's just the truth, right? You couple what they're doing legislatively here with what we know about the demographics, and it's just it's a tough pill to swallow, but we can't really deny it. So where do you but at the same time, man, convincing people to turn out is so hard. It is so hard. I mean, you were like, listen, this is what's going to happen. Like, seriously, it is on the ballot, man. And I even say it in more than one language, and it's still, and a lot of us are out here trying to convince people in different languages. And I see we have Carolyn Fan and turnout is such. How do you navigate that, Janaea? I'm curious about that.
Oh man, we hit OBS. We basically took the words right out of my mouth. We before the big election day, before November 3rd, we pretty much did we were out in communities. We literally going door to door, trying to speak to members about No on 3, trying to really reinstate, hey guys, this is not for everybody. This literally will do more harm than it will do good for the people. We had something for the children, a program just for them coming, to get candy for Halloween. And literally the same day we have information here, leaflets about voting, and just especially for the 22nd ward and in the city, just trying to have basically what we called it a cheat sheet, in the sense of the people who to vote for. We just kind of it's kind of repetitive in that sense, but you have to be because a lot of people in the community, they've lost hope, and that's a perfectly normal and common thing when you see people feeling like they are not being heard, or they're just not cared about. And sometimes, yes, literally they're not, and especially when it's coming to this redistricting, that a lot of people are intentionally, like you said, are trying to be left out. And so I would say with navigating that, we literally just try to advocate for why this is so important for people in communities, period. We just try to tell everyone through literally going door to door. We were making calls, trying to say people, hey, did you register to vote, census? And then, we got those responses. A lot of times people, I don't see how this helps me. I don't see how this would help the community. And that's perfectly fine, because either, I don't know, through like schooling or education, if you don't know, we will tell you. And that's what we just try our absolute best to do, is to advocate for why this is, it may not, it's not in our eyes. It is about the people in the offices who are representing us. It is about making sure we get the right people, but overall it is about the people. So we just try to tell them and reinstate as much as possible that, no voting, it means you're letting someone decide for you that this is the person who should be in office. This is the person to be taking care of the needs of the community. And I don't know about anybody else, but just letting something be decided without my input or insight, or just me at least taking the time, that doesn't sit right with me. And we try to tell community members that. And for the ones who's like, well, it doesn't affect me, we, try to tell them that information. And actually that regardless of if it was this year, next year, couple years, this most definitely affects you and everyone around you, and it could have horrible effects. We try to say about how if you don't like the way that things are going, maybe we could lead something with that. But whatever we have to do, whatever programs, like we had a community day in the 22nd ward on October the 3rd. And even there, just with like having things and programs for the community members to do, or to just, food to get that we had there. We also, again, had leaflets and information there to let them know and to make it as clear as possible. Please care, because if you don't, they don't, and it'll be just this continuous cycle of negativity and especially within the 22nd ward, violence, poverty. There's so much just this loss of hope, and we just try to put that as much in the people's minds as that it starts here, it starts now. Like, please go out and do what you can to help yourself and to help others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for us in the Latinx, and maybe we can talk about like what the most serious barriers are. I have a question from Tony and Carolyn. Like, I think that loss of hope, there's also a big overlap between like union organizing. Kind of the same. I have a good friend of mine who's really big but I mean, a lot of the labor movement in general, but in particular, he focuses a lot on, they get trained on certain techniques for how to get people involved and how to move them from that. You were talking about the repetition and how to move people. It's not just like, 10 points, 20 points of contact, all the same. It's like you're moving people from, I've never heard of you before, I don't know who you are, to, I'm kind of interested, tell me more, to, wait, all I need to do is click, and then they've clicked, and then maybe they've, donated, and maybe they've come to a meeting, and maybe now they're coming to every meeting, and now they're like leading your marches, and then, but you took them from that. Like, there was a point where that person had never heard of this, and they got through that like process. But there's actual technique. I mean, this is, books are written about it and stuff. And so I think one of our things in our community is like training organizers to organize. So people who are already committed in their hearts, but maybe don't have the skills. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a specific skill set. You don't just like fall out of college or high school or whatever, trade school, whatever you did or didn't do, and know how to organize people to action. And that's something that I'm really kind of going, okay, I think we need to organize our organizers and have, that's where I'm at. I don't know if that resonates with you, Janae, or you, Sean.
I think it's, for sure it's a skill, right? And that's, you know, that I think a lot of work that goes into that. To the original question of how, on this point, part of the answer is, you know, for folks who are running programs or campaigns, or thinking about how to fund or how to build programs, part of it is actually being intentional about how you're doing it. Almost everything can be done the same way it's been done before, and you go talk to the same folks who've participated in the past. But some intentionality matters and can go a long way into expanding the circle of folks who might otherwise get invited to participate in the process, however big or small you define what you're trying to do.
Yeah. What about you, Janae?
I would say, absolutely, organizing and having ways or skills, as you said, to get people more involved and get people in more advocation for certain matters. That definitely is a skill, and just speaking on it, period, is a skill to me as well. I found it, at least thinking about my own schooling, just from starting as freshman and like coming up until now, it is a lot that goes into trying to give people the tools, or even just telling them about it. It goes a lot into it. You can't, I guess, explain things any kind of way or say things any kind of way, and having that organization to draw people together. Absolutely, it takes a lot. It takes a lot, and especially, I suppose, if not executed correctly or done correctly, like things could just, you know, as you can say, see, you know, turnout. You know, turnout may not necessarily increase from that. So it's very vital that you know how, or just even if not knowing how, learn how. And everybody comes into their own in that sense. Organizing or like planning or having the skills like that, it's different for every person as well, different for every field that you may see. So yeah, absolutely. Having those skills to try to organize others into seeing that their needs need to be met, and if they, you know, do this or do that it can be. Yes, that's absolutely important, and a skill as well that I see often actually within the field. It's pretty incredible to see somebody kind of at work in that, and to have people coming from this one mindset of, you know, well, this isn't for me, or, you know, I'm not sure about this. I don't know how this has anything to do with, you know, so and so, and then having them come from that mindset, and then going into, you know what, I can see your point, or, you know, looking at it from a whole different perspective. It's surreal. It's pretty cool, actually. So yes, having those skills, it's essential. So
yeah.
So we have a couple of more minutes in the session for this particular session, but there's been some questions I think probably you can answer, Alex, and that is, what has been the growth of the political power in Missouri of Latinos, and is there any group or person that's sort of leading that charge? So if you could respond to that, and then I think there's one around legislative stuff that maybe Sean could answer.
Yeah, well, we are actually, I'm in another group, one of the many groups that I'm in, and we have a couple of attendees, participants here in our event today that are also working towards creating a Hispanic caucus. So a political caucus, again, that structure of, you know, really to provide a structure, which is the word that I just used, but to funnel the interest, because I do think there actually is a lot of activity. As I said, you know, we're here. There is a lot of activity, and there's a lot of work being done, but it's largely not political. I mean, and I think that's true. There's a lot of civic engagement happening in the Hispanic Leaders Group that I'm also part of, and we have Tony who asked that question, but we are also working on the Hispanic caucus. And of course, we want people in positions of influence in our community to get involved, and from committees and commissions to really take an active role in supporting the formation of the caucus. And hopefully we'll be hearing more about that in the near future.
So for Sean, just the nature of the fact that this state legislature completely overturned the will of the people in 2018 and came back with Amendment 3. What are you suggesting to people in terms of holding the legislature accountable? If they're there for the will of the people, then how does this fit in? It's definitely a human right being violated somewhere, I'm almost sure. And also, how do you make the legislature more sensitive to inclusion, and particularly around issues of language and accessibility, which, you know, they don't have a clue seemingly?
So for sure, like, overturning the will of the people is a sad tradition in Missouri. Like, you know, whether that's, you know, I haven't been around all that long, but, like, you know, the minimum wage gets passed in 2006, and their annual attempts to try and undo that. The minimum wage goes up again in 2018, and there's attempts almost immediately to whittle that away. There's laws passed by the people on animal rights and puppy mills. The legislature tries to undo them. Clean energy, redistricting, right to work, right? Like, so you get, you know, the people voted down 2-1, and then, you know, they come right back and do it. So there's a big disconnect between what our elected folks are working on and where the people are at. And that's going to take a long time to get rectified. And there are structural reasons why that is the case. I think at the other end of that, though, I mean, for sure, there are a lot of goobers in office right now. And what we have found, it is certainly hard to get folks in power to think about, you know, the people who don't look like them or don't have the exact same life experience as them. But where there is opportunity at times, and where you can change mind, is often when you're able to connect what you're working on and what you're fighting for to someone that they know, to a family member or a neighbor, and then they're able to humanize it and tell a story to themselves and, like, understand it in a way that, oh, okay, maybe, like, my past choices, or maybe there's an opening there. So, you know, one thing that comes to mind, like, there were legislators who were part of trying to pass the same-sex marriage ban in the early aughts, you know, but then over time came to find out that they've got a nephew or a niece or a neighbor who has come out and is like, oh, like, I've known that person their whole life, and they aren't terrible, ridiculous person. Like, maybe you know, it is hard for people to admit that they've changed their mind, and like, that's its own barrier. But, you know, those human connections are a way to do that. When it comes to voting rights, you know, I know, Janae, you talked about that. Oftentimes, too often people think about expansion of voting rights as things that help other people or people who don't look like them. Because as in, like, you know, really a simple way of thinking about it. But if you can help tell the story of aunts and uncles and who, you know, may have a disability or some other reason why, you know, some of the existing structures get in the way, that can create an opportunity with voters to go, oh yeah, maybe we should make advanced voting more accessible or something like that. So that is a long, convoluted answer perhaps there to your question there, Jamala. But you know, I think we got to fight big and make structural changes, but also humanize and make things very tangible and real when you're trying to make short-term gains and change individual minds.
So I want to thank all the panelists and for you, Carlos, for those very probing kinds of questions, and also from the chat. Those were some good questions that people asked. Some of them, most of them, I think we tried to cover. But so I think just in conclusion, we realized that we are government, and we are the change agents for the kind of society that we want to live in. And one of the ways that we can at least have as a guiding principle is the, you know, human rights, because these are supposed to supersede laws, which are man-made. These are universal. And so these are the ones that we really want to hold up. And I remember one year, there was an attorney, Alex, who got the unsung hero. And he was like, I didn't even know these existed, because, you know, when you practice in law, you just assume that these are the rights and that there's no other rights. And I think we really raised his consciousness about how this can actually be folded into the way that you look at, you know, the law. Because one of the things about the laws is, like, We just heard Sean talk about how we pass a law and then other people who don't like that law change it, as opposed to this is the law of the land, but this is supposed to be the law of the globe. And so thank you for your insights, for your work. And speaking of human rights work, we have some nominees who have been nominated for Unsung Heroes and Sheroes. And so we're going to ask Aaron Pelker to read their names, say their names, and acknowledge them. Generally, if it was not for COVID, this is a program in real life, in real person, and you would get this beautiful certificate and a hearty handshake, but we can't do that right now. So we are just going to acknowledge your name and know that in the mail, you would get this beautiful certificate, which simply says, in celebration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, such and such unsung is recognized as an unsung human rights hero. Your human rights work has not gone unnoticed. And we try to collect these all year for people to be thinking about, who are you looking at that's actually advancing, protecting, advocating for human rights? And so we have at least a dozen people who would get that. So turning it over to you, Aaron.
Yeah, so we have, like Jamala said, we have 16 unsung heroes and sheroes that we would like to recognize for their work in advocacy in and around human rights in our community. And those 16 individuals are as follows, and please forgive me if I mispronounce anyone's name, it is not my intention. But first we have Jason Frazier, we have Angela Banks, Scott Schindler, Michael Sinsel, Jeff Blyden, Kimberly Murphy, Lisa Lagrone, Gilberto Pineda, Hanini Hilberg, Yvonne Bullinger, Carolyn Fan, Darren Slyman, Antonio or Tony Maldonado, and then our three wonderful panelists tonight, Sean Nicholson, Alexandra Johnson, and Janaea Jones. So thank you for all of your hard work and advocacy in the community. And I guess I'll turn it back over to Jamala to kind of wrap it up this evening and bring us home.
So I want to congratulate the heroes and sheroes as well. Hopefully we have addresses for all of you all, because we will have to mail your certificate. But we want you to visit the Coalition for Human Rights Facebook page. This will be streamed on the Missouri Historical Society's website, but we'll also share it on ours. And there you can get more information. Generally, after these programs, we always take lots of pictures and we post them on our Facebook page. We won't have much of that, but we will have this recording. So people who want to join us, leave your information there, or you can email us at STLC, the number 4, HR, St. Louis Coalition for Human Rights, at yahoo.com. And, again, looking for people who are unsung heroes and sheroes, but also if you want to join the planning committee. We start planning in August, and it's once a month, and we plan it, and we usually have a good time doing that. And so if you want to join us, just let us know. So I'm going to, again, say be safe, be well, stay healthy, know your human rights so that you can protect your human rights and get involved in 2021. Good night.
Yeah, thanks again to everyone for joining us this evening. A special thanks to all three of our panelists. We hope you'll fill out those surveys before you leave the program tonight. And I did want to mention on behalf of the Missouri History Museum, we'll be taking a short break from virtual programming for the holiday season. But we do hope you'll join us for our next virtual program in 2021 on Tuesday, January 12th at 11 a.m. for CSTL Mining St. Louis History. So thanks again and enjoy the rest of your night. Have a great night, everyone.